Welcome to this explainer. Today we're actually stepping away from those grand, sweeping battlefield maps of World War II. Instead, we're looking at something much smaller, but honestly, infinitely more profound. We're going to explore this incredibly intimate, deeply emotional story of one family, the Sievers. And we're juxtaposing their story right up against the massive, unrelenting scale of a global war. So picture this. It's late June 1944. We're in San Diego, which is a city that's been utterly transformed by the Navy. But at its core, this is really a story about a homecoming, a new baby, and the heavy, heavy shadow of duty.
Okay, let's dive into this. My brother is bringing a warship into San Diego Bay. Just let that realization hang in the air for a second. That's Fred Seaver. He's just finished reading a letter from his brother Ed, and the reality of the whole situation has suddenly crystallized for him. His brother isn't just dropping by for a visit. He's literally bringing a warship into San Diego Bay. And bam, the immediate stakes of our explainer are set right there in that single awe-inspiring sentence.
Part 1. The Optimist's Letter. So our narrative actually kicks off on Wednesday, June 14th. Fred's wife, Betty, finds a letter in the afternoon mail from Ed. And tracing this timeline, we can see exactly how the massive, macro events of a global war instantly rippled right down to domestic shores and family planning. On June 7th, the whole crew hears the news of the Normandy invasion on the radio. They immediately know what that means, right? The Pacific matters now more than ever. Literally the very next day, June 8th, Ed writes to Fred. And by June 14th, that letter reaches San Diego, bringing the startling news that Ed's ship is going to arrive in just 6 days, on June 20th.
Now, what's really interesting here is the immense burden of leadership you can feel radiating from Ed. He's the commanding officer of the LCIG 728. He's only 30 years old, almost 31, but when he looks at his crew of 15 enlisted men, he says he feels ancient. He wants his brother to read between the lines here, to really grasp the sheer, terrifying weight of being responsible for boys who are just so incredibly young.
But then, right alongside that heavy burden of war, Ed's letter is just packed with these beautiful, completely mundane domestic details. He's chatting about visiting Aunt Emily's house, sorting out the logistics for their sister Janet's upcoming trip, and even playfully warning Betty to get her legendary Leominster spice cake ready. And most importantly, he absolutely insists his new nephew, Randy, had better be enormous because he's been bragging about the kid to his crew for months. It's such a perfect contrast between the grim reality of his command and the ordinary family life he so desperately clings to.
Part 2. The ship comes in.
All right, so it's the early morning of June 20th. Fred arranges to get a late start at work and stands out on the Embarcadero near 28th Street. His hands are in his pockets, and he's just watching the gray-blue still waters of San Diego Bay. Then, at 8:30, she appears, 158 feet long. And look, this isn't a ship of grandeur or ceremony, okay? It is a gray, gun-clad working vessel moving with absolute purposeful efficiency into the naval station at 32nd Street. She was designed and built for a very specific job in a very specific war.
So, the crucial point is, the true weight of this moment actually lies in the human element aboard that 158-foot vessel. Somewhere on that gray ship are 15 young sailors, and somewhere among them is Fred's brother. He's commanding them, entirely bearing the weight of their survival. Fred's too far away to actually make out any faces, but the reality of those lives really hits him hard as he watches the lines go out.
Fred observes the ship, and his thought here captures the entire moment perfectly. He notes she's both smaller and larger than he'd expected. Smaller physically than he had pictured in his mind, sure, but infinitely larger in what she was about to do and the massive reality she represented. He watches for a few more minutes, doesn't say a word, and just quietly heads off to work.
Part 3. A San Diego Reunion.
Fast forward a bit to Sunday, June 25th. We're at the bustling Chamberlain House in Kensington. The brothers finally sit down to this massive meal, and almost instantly they fall into an old, hilarious debate about a totally destroyed car on a Connecticut back road way back in 1931. Ed, who has had 12 years of practice and complete composure, insists the crash was a quote-unquote mechanical failure. But Fred strictly corrects him and says no, it was a ditch. It's just this wonderful lighthearted moment that really shows their deep, unbroken bond. The war hasn't erased who they are to each other, not at all.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark contrast between their current lives. You look at them, and Ed is in his tan summer khakis, wearing his Lieutenant JG stripes, looking really settled and established. Meanwhile, Fred is wearing a charcoal suit, the one Betty actually gave him for Christmas, because, hey, some things definitely warrant a suit. They sit and talk about Fred's work in aircraft production at Roar,
the looming draft boards, and of course, they talk about their widowed mother Bessie back in New England. They're sharing completely different yet profoundly connected wartime burdens.
Part 4. Meeting Baby Randy.
Now, when Ed walks through the door, he bypasses all the normal social pleasantries and goes straight for the genuine emotion. He looks at baby Randy, and Randy looks right back. With that intense, focused seriousness of a baby evaluating a brand new face, Randy just stares at his uncle. Ed gently holds out his finger, and Randy makes a deliberate choice. He reaches out and takes it tightly in his little fist. Honestly, it is the quiet, emotional climax of this entire explainer. Then, Ed looks at his nephew and delivers this incredible line about the crew already knowing he exists and considering him a point of pride. Just think about how beautifully that connects a tiny, innocent baby in a sunny San Diego living room to 15 young sailors preparing to head out into the vast, deeply dangerous Pacific. Randy's existence is a point of pride for men who haven't even met him. He's literally a symbol of the future they're fighting for. But throughout this joyous lunch, there is an uninvited guest in the room, the shadow of August. Ed talks very carefully about his ship and his crew, but he doesn't talk directly about August. Yet, August is absolutely there. Everyone in that room knows that an impending Pacific deployment is looming over them. It's this unspoken acknowledgement, basically a silent agreement on the terms of their gathering. Time is incredibly short.
Part 5. Holding what is given.
While domestic order reasserts itself inside the house, the two brothers take their coffee out to the Kensington garden. They sit on a swinging coach in the warm June fullness, totally surrounded by spilling bougainvillea and the smell of jasmine. And you just have to wonder, how do you prepare? How do you sit in a beautiful, sunny garden with your brother, drinking coffee, knowing exactly what waits across the ocean? For a while, they just sit in that comfortable Seaver silence, unable to bridge the gap between this peaceful afternoon and the war.
When Fred finally asks his brother how he really is, Ed replies with just sheer vulnerability. He says he's done the work, the boat is right, the crew is ready. But then he admits what actually keeps him up at night. Those young boys. Whether he's going to do his job well enough, whether they will all come home. It's the raw, terrifying reality of a 30-year-old man carrying the lives of others right in his hands. Let's move on and see how this builds, because the bittersweet reality of their remaining timeline is really stark. Step 1 is today, June 25th, this fleeting Sunday reunion. Step 2 is coming up on July 7th, when their sister Janet arrives by train. And Step 3 is, well, it's the black box of August, the Pacific deployment. They literally have just weeks left to be a family before the ocean takes Ed away. In the late afternoon, it's finally time to leave. Randy is already fast asleep on Betty's shoulder. Ed walks them to the car, stands on the front walk, and just places his hand briefly on his sleeping nephew's back. Just for a moment, just to have done it. He whispers his goodbye. Betty silently presses Ed's hand. And as Fred drives them back toward Chula Vista through the long, golden San Diego evening, the figure of his brother slowly fades in the rearview mirror.
Fred realizes as they drive that all he can do is hold on to these fragments. The war takes so much, but June had given him this day. June had given him his brother's face, his brother's laugh, and his brother's hand on his son's sleeping back. He had learned, in these impossible months, to hold what was given.
Which really leaves us with this final thought. When the world is swept up in massive, terrifying historical events, we so often look to the battlefields for heroism. But isn't holding on to these quiet, fleeting moments of family, of a brother's laugh, of a baby gripping a finger, isn't that, in itself, the greatest act of resilience? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope you found the Seaver story as moving and profound as I did.